And we're back already. Look at that. All I did was press stop and then start again for the next video. Thanks for coming back. This video is going to be a little bit more different. It's going to be about this one specific article we came across in my previous video. So I hope you enjoy. Let's see if you get anything interesting or worthwhile from it. All right. Next article is from Business Insider. That's fantastic. What did they have to say? Housing economists have a great idea that could just about fix everything. Yeah, a fix everything idea from Business Insider. That's gonna be good. Let's see. Cities and towns across the country are struggling with underused land and shortage of housing. Okay. One relatively simple idea could address both problems and help solve the affordability crisis. Land value taxes would be more efficiently and equitably rebalance real estate. Cities and towns across America are dealing with either an abundance of underused land or shortage of housing, or both. Sorry, it's a little hard for me to read. My monitor is a little big and a little bit out there, so that's why I'm reading slow. I know how to read. I'm kind of like cautious about this article because when I hear Business Insider and housing, red flags start to like go up. Like alarms are ringing in my head right now. Let's see. Economists and policymakers are increasingly promoting relatively simple policy that could go a long way to addressing both of these crises. Simultaneously, bringing housing costs down in the most expensive places and boosting investments in struggling communities. Okay, let's see. The ideology is centered on the idea that natural resources should be shared by everybody rather than monopolized by the wealthy elite. Okay, that sounds interesting. Fast forward nearly 150 years, and the Georgia's proposal, land value taxation, is being promoted by urbanists and pro-development advocates as a solution to the housing affordability crisis and much more. Oh god, I hate these slideshow articles. I think I can skip this though. The principle is tax what you take out of the natural world, not what you make. Not what you make. Let's see. YIMBYs. God, I hate that word. Because I know it means only one thing. If it does, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit, but it's something that's gonna require some video later. Let's see. The politics are tricky. Free market conservatives and libertarians like how efficient and pro-development is. Just a handful of American cities and countries in the world are experimenting with it. More than a dozen cities in Pennsylvania had success with land value taxes. Will politicians fix the housing crisis? Probably not. Well, haven't they? Okay, you know what? This is a completely different article, but I'm going to talk about this considering it's actually kind of like related to either this or the previous articles we've seen today. A lot of politicians, at least I can say in BC, I don't know as much maybe in other cities and countries and states, but politicians have a direct access to contractors. So when a development company wants to put up a building, they first have to go through several layers of politicians who have to approve the use of that land, and who approves that land is politicians. So they usually get their first pick of land that comes in, and that's why a lot of houses go right to a rental model where the house, before it even like goes into market, is already ready to rent. And a lot of them do it under the guise of like, let's build this building where we can have like affordable housing. But a lot of these buildings are really just buildings where you're paying your um, landlord rent money to the politician. The only thing is that obviously politicians know how bad it looks, so they try to have like a mediator in between them so that um, it doesn't seem how obvious how bad it is. But believe me, talk to anyone in BC who works in contract, who's a contractor, like builds buildings or is like in construction or some level of working with politicians, and they will tell you that a lot of houses in BC are owned by politicians. Okay, let's see. Lawmakers in Detroit and Minnesota have proposed versions of tax. Detroit's mayor is passionate advocate for raising taxes on land, lowering them on homeowners, and as a way to fight blight and encourage building, he wants to make it more expensive for investors to buy up and sit on scrapyards, parking lots, and vacant property. Yeah, there's a lot of vacant properties out in many cities that are like, it's just a house and it's sitting empty because a lot of these houses make more money by just sitting there than they do having someone live in it and give you money for rent. Um, sometimes you can double dip and have both collect rent money and have the property increase in value. Da, da, da. Land value taxes, more efficient use of land, fixing a problem created by property taxes, incentivize law owners to maximize revenue from their property, building apartment buildings instead of a parking lot. Well, parking lots still bring in value and it's still an important part of a property. How can you have an apartment without a parking lot? Unless, of course, you try to build an apartment where no one's allowed to have their own car, I guess. But before we click off this article, I do want to look at something I saw. I think it was this picture actually. Um, yeah, so it says land value tax incentives would incentivize development on valuable urban land, discouraging service parking lots, and other forms of land use that generate relatively little value. And that's definitely a sentence that kind of brought up some concerns in my head because if you look at this picture, you can see that with this kind of like land area, you could definitely, for example, remove this parking lot and put up like, one of these buildings, maybe even two. And then maybe, I don't know, double dip and make this like a big enough parking lot to make up for it. Or even with something that a lot of these urbanists, kind of like a quote unquote advocates, kind of like try to fight for is just to not even have any of these. Like even one of these cars is one too many. And there's a lot of talk about creating car-free and 15-minute cities, which will be its own topic to talk about in the future. But the thing I want to bring about with this one here is how a lot of these guys talk about trying to make the best use out of this land, and you absolutely could make a lot of use out of this land, right? If you compare, say, kind of like a city in the Midwest of the United States where they have like large suburbs compared to Japan where you know, a population twice that of Canada, Canada being one of the biggest countries in the world, um, with Japan being one of the smallest countries, but so densely packed, having twice the population, you do start to compare how differently they try to use their land. And a lot of people talk about, um, less room for cars means more room for houses and other kinds of value. And that is something that, obviously applies more to Japan being a much smaller land. But with Japan, they have like all of these transportation systems that, move them throughout Japan, like the bullet train. And Japan still also has a very thriving car community and car scene where, people still continue to own cars and, drive their cars. You know, if we were to kind of like compare something like a tiny island where it's so small, nobody would need transportation. For example, an island so small that you could get from one side to another side in 15 minutes, and everything you need is on that island. Let's say it has everything on it, a school, a hospital. Then, it's so great you don't need any kind of form of transportation. You don't even need a bicycle, let alone a car. You can just kind of like walk from one side to another. That's a great way to kind of like make the best out of that island. And again, there's a lot of talks about 15-minute cities and going car free that I'll talk about in the future. But what I want to talk about is how all of this honestly does not fall into a just about everything kind of plan that a lot of these guys have set for us. A lot of people know that sure you can get by without a car in a super densely packed city, but they prefer not to be in that densely packed city. In all the hubbub of the hustle and bustle of a city. They rather live 15 minutes away from all that. Be in the suburb where sure, everything is at least a 15 minutes drive away, but you have your own little community where it's a lot more quiet. It's just you and your neighbors. You have your own plot of land, and a lot of these kind of like 15-minute communities kind of rely more on you do not need to own this house. The government owns your house. You do not need a car. The government owns your form of transportation, i.e., public transportation. And, a lot of it starts to get into like all of these other heated debates that a lot of things start to get controversial. So again, that's why I think this requires its own topic that I'll need to talk about in a completely different video. But what I do want to say, because I've already talked so much, is it's not one plan fix all, especially not for all people. Many people do not really subscribe to this idea of wanting to live in kind of like this community that just kind of like prioritizes milking every single dollar from every single inch of land as possible. Because to be honest, it's not just about people. If you want to look at politicians, obviously a lot of politicians care more about money than they do about people, right? I think I talked about that a little bit in my previous video about the drug crisis and immigration, where we have a lot of people coming in, and there's not enough resources and doctors to go around to try to like be able to take care of all of these people. And that's not going into a conversation about immigration or anti-immigration. I don't have a problem with immigration, but a lot of people do have to consider that, when you have a lot of people in a small amount of area, you also have to make sure that that amount of area is able to sustain that number of people. And what a lot of politicians try to do is try to put as many people in a small amount of land, because a lot of politicians, say like a mayor or city councilor, usually only kind of like have jurisdiction over that land. So their priority is trying to bring as many taxpayers into that area, because the more people they have in that area, the more money that area generates, and the more money they get to take home for themselves. And there's kind of talk about trying to make the best use out of the smallest bit of land is less about um, making the world better for you, and more about making the world kind of like more fair for the wealthy. I think if we remember, there was something they said earlier. What was that quote? Was it down here? Oh yeah. See, it's like the principle is tax what you take out of the land, not what you make, and creating like a fair tax system where you're not paying as much taxes on how much money you're making. And a lot of these people who make a lot of money also do tend to spend a lot of money, but the whole problem becomes, who's really kind of providing any kind of movement in the economy. When rich people make money, a lot of it goes into like their own bank accounts, their own vaults, and they use a lot of that money into investment to continue to grow their own assets. Um, the rest of us, when we make money, a lot of that money continues to circulate. If we remember, like the whole situation with COVID and what caused this like record inflation, we had all of this money that went into kind of like paying for people that could not work, right? You had to like stay at home for a while, but you still needed money to be able to afford things. And the money that we were getting was what, like say $2,000. There's a lot of conversations going on about like all of the money that was being handed down for during COVID to all the people. And one kind of thing that was a very common talking point was how when you give $2,000 to a person during COVID times, they're going to be able to put that money back into the economy, right? Because when you give someone like you or me $2,000, what they do is they go out and buy food with it, or maybe they need to go buy something that they need around the house. Um, when you give $2,000 to a super rich person, what are they going to do with $2,000? They don't need $2,000. They're just going to, put it back into their back pocket, put it back in the bank, and that money will never be seen again. And so we need to kind of remember like who a lot of these people are fighting for, and it's not you and me. And there's something I want you guys to kind of be wary of when you see things like urbanists and YIMBYs and these kinds of dog whistles used. It's trying to call upon those people, because those guys are trying to create a system that's gonna be a lot worse for the future of everyone living in it. If we were going to look at another thing they were talking about is climate, because it goes back into how much people are making, and how much we are, taking out of the world, you have to remember, if I kind of go over to this tab, um, the richest 1% of people are responsible for more than twice as much as carbon pollution as the poorest half of the world's population. So that should kind of like give you a bit of a signifier, because they also put in this picture of like all these cars, but all these cars aren't being driven by the richest 1%. They're being used by, like regular folk like you and me. Um, Cars are always used in this topic of pollution, because a lot of these urbanists are trying to create car-free cities, but the richest 1%, like say Taylor Swift, she kind of like goes on a private jet flight for a shorter distance than the average person takes on a regular walk, to a grocery store. And what a lot of these people do is blame you and me for driving our cars. And this is so kind of like a bad faith argument to have against people who, dare use their car for any activity, be it recreational, or be it for something as trivial as using it to take your kids to soccer practice, or to get, groceries. Why use a car to get groceries when you can use a bicycle to get groceries, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like trying to say like you and I are the bad people for, for driving our car, while we're choking on paper straws. Rich people are flying jets and living lavish lives on yachts. So these people are not your friends, right? This is something that we all have to remember. If we were going to talk about rich people, we also have to keep in mind the single richest person in the world being Elon Musk. He pays about $1 per year for rent for his gigafactory in New York. If you want to kind of like put that in comparison, let's actually look at what is the average monthly rent in New York, and we get $4,000 a month. So you pay $4,000 a month. If we take that and times 12, please, we get $46,000. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is paying $1 per year for a gigafactory in New York too. So these people are not fighting for the poor. A lot of the poor people don't even like have the ability to pay, $1,000 of rent. So a lot of them are going to be living in homes, living in a van, for example. This has become such a huge trend among younger generations, because, we're not going to be able to buy a house or even a condo ever, but at least a van. How much does a van cost? Your entire expenses, I guess, comes down to about $2,000 a month, which is still pretty high. But I guess you're paying for other amenities that shouldn't be part of this. I don't know. How much is a van? I just want to look at like property values, because I want to look at like how much is like a Sprinter van. Okay, I'm getting some really weird numbers. $250,000 to $300. So I mean, it depends on how good you want your van to be, but some minivans are about like $53K. So that's much less than a house, which is at least 10 times more than that, at the very least. Um, so yeah, um, milking every plot of land um, to generate more money out of it when the richest 1% of the population that are committing more than twice um, the population as the poorest half while paying $1 for rent, you kind of start to see that there's some hypocrisy going on here. There's some things going on here that they're not telling us. So um, do be careful. I think at this point I'm probably gonna split this part of the video out and just kind of like make it a part two. And for part three, we can look at some of these other articles because there's a lot to talk about. And at this point, we probably have, like God knows how many more articles there are out there, right? So yeah, I hope you guys kind of enjoyed the ramblings. I did kind of go on a tangent there, but I think that this is very important for all of us to keep in mind. Thanks. I hope you guys learned something new, because I certainly didn't.